Did you know that Google personalizes many searches by city and Also Asked is the only tool to access live People Also Asked data at city level? Try for free at alsoasked.com.
I was going to say that SEO with Fat Joe is as peaceful as this, but then the birds are all having fights.
Tired of SEO guesswork? Quadra's AI agent goes deeper to uncover high-impact optimizations and completes hours of SEO in minutes. Get started now.
Hello. Thank you for the introduction, Liam. I am Sophie. So as he already said, Head of Paid Social. To give you a bit of an intro into S360, our purpose is really around transforming brands into e-com leaders. And the way that we do that, and the way that we do that is through brand and performance services. So dual side, looking really at the customer profiling, brand creative, and then also from the performance side, everything that we're here about today. So paid SEO. And with that, we have worked with a number of different retailers. So the likes of Wrangler, New Era, Victoria Beckham, the list goes on. But to get into it, the reason that I'm here today is, to talk about how we can use trends more in our campaigns. And the way that I'm going to do that is firstly by looking at the current state of play. What's working on paid social at the moment, before then getting into a case study with one of our brands, Wrangler, about how we elevated their performance through trends. So, the current state of play. I think if we really strip it back, there are two main reasons that we can drive paid social performance. The first one of those is through reaching every stage of the funnel. Now, you can say funnel, we tend to talk about it as more of a circle because that awareness is very consistent. But really to drive that sustained brand growth, we need to be hitting from awareness right the way through to acquisition and retention. So with awareness, that means inspiring and creating that demand, then consideration, engaging, nurturing those users, before then acquisition, driving those really high brand loyalists who are going to come back to our brand again and again. And all too often, I audit accounts where they're just doing the bottom two. They're just doing acquisition and retention, and I'm seeing nods. So I think this is quite a common thing that people see. And it drives really high ROAS, really low CPA to start off with, and then you just see performance plateau. So you need to, so you need to be hitting all of those touch points. The next part of that is creative. I feel every talk I've even been to today has been speaking about the need for creative volume, creative diversity, and that is so true. We know that to really drive creative performance, we need to hit, or paid social performance, we need to hit each of those stages, but we also need to have the creative there to support. So this was a study quite a few years ago now, but saying that creative made up 47% of performance. I actually think that's probably 60-70% now. It is so key. So the way that we approach this at S360 is through our brand concept framework. So really taking a brand's campaign and then thinking about how does that break down for each of the stages of the funnel and for the specific audiences that they're targeting as well. So this example with Wrangler was taking their SS25 campaign, translating it into a brand message that felt relevant to them, which was the For the Ride of Life, but then thinking about how does that translate for, say, women versus men. And you could go even more granular and think, how does that translate for millennials versus Gen Z? So in this case, for women, it was freedom and style. That's what they tended to connect with. The initial brand messaging was very much carefree, wherever life takes you, using video content at the awareness stage, then looking at more of the specific styling for consideration, before finally going for more of those product close-ups, hero products to convert. And then for men, much more adventure-driven. They wanted to know about the durability, the adventure messaging. And so that was the way that we approached it for them. So really thinking about how do we customize the creative for the audience, but also that stage of the funnel that they're in. And the videos aren't working, but essentially this is kind of how it ended up looking, where on the left, we had more of that initial brand-led videos, to then the right, which is more around conversion, really focusing in on those hero products to drive that sale. And so this has worked for quite a long time. Using that ad sequencing has been really successful. So we've worked with Wrangler since 2019, and every time we run one of these brand campaigns, we see those spikes. But then when we actually stood back, we start to see that actually those spikes were becoming a little bit harder to get. So what we were starting to see was that performance was plateauing. We were having to spend more to drive those spikes. So why was that? Firstly, Advantage Plus. It's been around, I think, since 2022. And I remember first using it and it was terrible. I think everyone was like, what is this new objective? It's not working. But actually, since probably early last year, it's really started to pick up. And not just because Meta has been pushing it, but also because the performance from Advantage Plus has definitely improved. And that's quite hard when you're also pushing ad sequencing, because Advantage Plus is all about broad, machine-led, not necessarily talking to each stage of the funnel in the traditional way that we would. And so that means it makes it harder for our creative, and more when we run Advantage Plus, we're putting great branding, video content there, but it's just prioritizing statics because that's what drives the click-through rates. And secondly, consumers were changing. So not sure if everyone's heard about choice paralysis, but so many brands are suffering from this at the moment, where they're driving traffic to site, but their consumers are then scrolling, but they're not actually purchasing because they're giving too much choice. They don't know what to purchase. And similarly, consumers are becoming a lot harder to relate and drive brand loyalists. So that means that it's not necessarily just about the brand name anymore. We need to give more to drive that acquisition. And that brings us to trend pulse campaigns. So when we say trends, we normally think TikTok, and you can see how much TikTok shop searches have grown in the last 4 years or so. And we can also see that there's a lot of brands that are really elevating because of the use of trends. So this is an example from Abercrombie, who I think even 3 years ago were kind of a dead brand. Like if you were wearing Abercrombie, it was about 15 years ago. Why do you still own that Abercrombie and Fitch t-shirt? Whereas now, I know so many people who have these Sloan trousers. They were such a hit. Does anyone actually own them in the room? No, you should. They're amazing. I was going to wear them today. But yeah, they are really jumping on some of those trends. So the Sloan was directly in line with the power dressing trend. So thinking about tailoring, and that has helped with that elevation. And you see it with brands like Marks and Spencer's as well, how they have pushed like their viral loafers. They're able to create relevance again because they're adopting trends. So that sounds very easy, but actually for the majority of brands, they're already struggling with producing the volume of creative. If you add a layer of trends in as well, that is very, very difficult to do. So what we did was actually relook at the creative process and how we work with our clients. So traditionally, this has been how we've got paid social creative. So we do the briefs, we do the production, we do the build, and then we learn, and then we do it all again. But actually what we realized was we need a step before we do the briefs, which is actually looking at the trends and beginning to look at their assets and what can we do with what they've already got. And part of this was then where the trend platform was born. And this is something that, we've done with a number of clients now, where essentially we look at Google search trends, we look at social listening platforms. We look at just scrolling TikTok and scrolling Reels. I love that is part of my job now. I can say that I'm doing work when I'm just scrolling TikTok. And then start to think about, okay, for this fashion brand, what are all the possible trends that they could adopt? But then it's actually starting to take it down and see, okay, out of these trends, which ones are the best ones for this brand? And that comes down to 3 reasons. Firstly, the product. Do they have the product to relate to this trend? So if you wanted to go after power dressing, but you didn't have a blazer, you can't relate to that trend. Secondly, the customer. Does the customer actually align with the trend that we're trying to push? If we're targeting millennials, but then we're trying to push Gorp core, might not actually align. And then finally, the longevity. So many of the brands that we work with have already such stretched resources and stretched teams that we don't want to be putting all of this effort in to create assets, to create campaigns that speak to this trend if it's going to be gone in 2 weeks. So what we try and do by using Google search trends is begin to figure out, when is that peak? Is it a 2-week trend, or is it something that is going to be for 3-4 months that we can really adopt and build on? And so for Wrangler, this broke down to 3 possible trends. So denim tuxedo and ski style fashion were what we call trickle down trends. So ones that came from designers, from runways, but then there was Gorp core, which was more of a trickle up trend. So it was born in social platforms. So those were possible trends. But then the ones that we actually went for were that denim tuxedo and that ski style fashion, because they already had products in their new season that were going to speak directly to these trends. So we were able to select the specific products and then encourage us to use those as the hero assets for our upcoming campaign. And if we didn't have the content, use creators to plug that gap so that we could have content that spoke directly to what people were interested in at the moment. And then how that translated to the campaign structure. So previously, we were running a very classic full funnel structure. So video views, traffic, and then Advantage Plus. But actually, we knew to give this trend the push that it needed, we needed to have a dedicated campaign that was specifically speaking to trends. So we added in that additional layer. And to be honest, I see this changing even within the next year. It might be that next year we just run Advantage Plus and just video views, because that's the way that Meta's going. It's less about the funnel. It's more around use the machine learning. AI is not going away. We need to adapt. Cool. And then the next stage was, okay, how do we amplify that cross-channel? Because we talk a lot about trends with TikTok, but really trends are relevant everywhere. So thinking about how that content looked on TikTok, how it looked on Instagram, and then how it looked on programmatic display and video as well, and making sure that it was very cohesive in the narrative, but then also making sure that that was supported on site. If we were doing all of this hard work to really push trends on a platform level, but then they were just going to a site that was new in, that's not really going to speak to them. But if they were going to a site that was talking to denim tuxedo, how do you style this outfit, it's likely to have a lot more engagement. So we'd started to see that performance plateau, but what was the impact of the trend campaign? And yeah, it was pretty big. So we had stable spend, but we saw sales increase 35% year on year. And all of our best performing assets were ones which specifically spoke to the trends. So we made sure that we also run assets in our usual process where we just kind of took what the brand gave us, but then tested them against these trend assets, and they were the strongest performers. So we've spoken a lot about fashion and how that speaks to trends, but what I wanted to make clear was that it's not just for fashion brands integrating these trends into your campaigns. This is an example for Barry M, where we did the same thing. So again, we looked at trend analysis, pulled out the likes of glossy lips, shimmer, no makeup, looked at product, longevity, and the customer, and then ended up pushing the shimmer, but then speaking to it for the Taylor Swift Eras tour. because we knew that that was a hype for, it felt like 2 years. I think it was 2 years, but probably specifically in London around 6 months. And that ad, became one of the top 10% on TikTok. So again, an example of how you can integrate trends. And it's also not just beauty. We've done it with Emma Bridgewater, a pottery brand, which has been more on trends and colors. So yeah, you can get creative and really, think about how you can integrate it into your campaigns. So to summarize, creative diversification is still key. We know that we need creative volume. We need diverse creative that speaks to every audience. So how can we integrate trends into that? Secondly, we don't need to just go after every single trend. We know that, resources are stretched often, and it's very hard getting the amount of creative that these platforms ask for. So we need to think about, the customer. Does it speak to the customer that we're going after? Does it speak to our brand DNA? Then the product. Do we have the product to really push this trend in an authentic way? And then finally, the longevity, impact versus input. We don't want to be creating all of these assets and it be gone in a week. And then finally, how can we amplify this cross-channel for ultimate impact? How can we make sure that we're pushing this trend on each of the platforms that we're running, but also creating an on-site experience that speaks to this trend as well? Cool. That was it from me. So thank you for your time. I'm going to do a shameless plug because at S360, we have our ecom leaders. There's multiple different formats. We do brunches at very nice London locations. So if you want, there's a QR code. And we also do more of these seminar events. So we're actually doing one with Google in October. So if you want to come, the QR code is there. But any questions, please come and find me. I'm always happy to chat.